It was
66 is what,
it was 72.
76 before.
Yeah, we're down 10.
10 points.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say.
Karen, can you hear me?
And when the final numbers come out, it's probably worse than that, but I think we're down 10 by all counts, right? So, you okay to go then?
What are you speaking about?
I'm doing something about the parties, future parties,
Okay, in terms of
of where they're going, colors, Alberta.
whatever. I wanted to talk about the campaign and why Bradwell was so popular. Segue into the what the public opinion said, and then talk a bit about turnout. I'm just wondering.
Can you hear us?
The sequencing. I should go first, or it doesn't matter.
We can change that.
Yeah, I might.
Let's do that.
Well, you go
Everyone
first,
else is talking about future, and I'm talking about
Okay.
present.
Let's
Do
do
that.
With the last
Can you hear us?
So, and then I'll build on something that you say probably in terms of.
No, we're going to be taking questions from the audience here and in Regina. And so one thing that, in order for it to get picked up through the media feed,
You're not on mute, are you, Mike, or Ken?
so once the question's asked here, Joe will repeat it when you can answer it.
Okay.
And then questions from Regina.
Yes, that sounds good now.
He's right there.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it sounds good now, Ken, thank you.
There's actually a J.
He's gone.
All right. I'm all set.
And how long do we have to speak?
You guys will be speaking in this order?
Yeah.
How long?
Okay, we don't have your voice. Turn on the.
You don't need our voice.
Okay, there we go.
Read my lips.
Okay, now
No new taxes. Oops, that's an old line.
So Ken, can you hear us well down there?
Yeah, perfectly.
Your ends will have to mute.
No, it works perfectly here.
Yes, but.
You will have to mute while we speak because there is just the echo is annoying. Did they hear that? You hear me, Regina?
Yes.
You will turn your microphone off while we speak?
Yeah, we will.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, they could not, they don't have a microphone.
He's coming. He's teaching to one more.
What's that?
Only person? One person. Sometimes you gotta be cute.
Well, good afternoon. Are we ready, everyone? Ready to go? Right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Garche. I'm the head of the Department of Political Studies here at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm honored to have been invited to participate in this panel, largely by way of being a monitor rather than a commentator. It's a nice break for me and probably a nice break for everyone else as well. In any case, I want to welcome you to this 2011 Saskatchewan election panel being hosted and sponsored by the Johnson-Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy, which, as most of you know, has both an arm here and another down in Regina. And quite often, at times like this, we're reminded that there are divisions in the province, but institutions such as the Johnson-Shoyama School tries to make sure that we stay united as much as possible. So we were divided yesterday and we're united here today in order to reflect on what happened. And I guess we know that what we witnessed last night was an historic event of substantial historic proportions that will undoubtedly rank up there with previous elections in this province. Most notable ones that stand out in my mind are the election of 1944, the election of that saw the CCF come to power, 64, the Liberals, 71, the NDP coming back to power, 82, the Conservatives, 91, the NDP, 2007, the new party, Saskatchewan Party being elected, and this election yesterday, 2011. We have a great panel here today to discuss the issues related to this particular election. And some may say that it's a post-mortem, but others would probably like to say that it's a rebirth, depending on which side of the partisan divide you're on. But others, I'm sure, are here wondering and asking the question, will there be a resurrection as well at some point for the NDP? Those are some of the interesting types of issues I think that this great panel will broach. Now, having said that, I'd like to introduce the panel and very quickly to tell you what I believe I've been told they're going to speak on. They may have been told something else and they can correct me if I'm wrong. But first and foremost, I think you've decided the order. You will go first, Loleen Berdahl, Associate Professor in Department of Political Studies, will go first. And she's going to talk about public opinion and voter turnout. It was interesting polls that we had, and it'd be interesting to hear what she has to say about voter turnout as well. David will talk more generally about the results and what was the nature of the results, and perhaps even what were some of the factors that accounted for those. And David is also a professor, assistant professor at St. Thomas More College in political studies, and we're happy and proud to call him a colleague of the greater department. As well, we have Michael Atkinson, who I'm sure many of you will know. He's the executive director, and professor here at the Johnson-Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy, who is very instrumental in having these kind of events, which become so interesting and so important for our institution and for the province. And last but not least, and he will talk about public policy issues and party platforms. And Daniel will do the same. And Daniel Beland, Canada Research Chair here at the Johnson-Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy, who is an expert in the areas of public policy and party platforms. And glad to have him in Saskatchewan and here today as well. So in terms of process, I'll be very quick about this. Panel members, I've been told, will get approximately 8 minutes each to speak. That will be followed by questions and answers. And I would like to emphasize that it should be primarily questions, and you can imagine, I think a lot of people will want to participate. If you have any kind of a preamble, make sure that it's a short one with a question to follow. I say that, and I also would like to say, please speak loudly and clearly when you do ask the questions, both here and particularly in Regina. The reason I have to ask for that is because I have been asked to repeat every question. I'm getting a little bit of hard of hearing, I have to admit, and so please, for my benefit and everybody else's benefit, speak loudly and clearly. I'll try to be as succinct and as true to your question as possible. So the shorter you make it, the easier it'll be for me to do that. Otherwise, I might have to interpret what you said. Finally, I think I should alert all of us that this is being recorded. So that may or may not affect your conduct or your behavior. I'm trying to forget that it will be recorded, so it doesn't affect mine too much. With all that, unless there are any questions of procedure or technology, I would like to turn to our first speaker, Loleen.
Thank you, Joe, and I'd like to first of all say thank you all for showing up, and a particular thank you to our students who have made it. I always am very encouraged when a lot of students show up to an event like this. So what we saw yesterday was actually the 6th election in Canada this year due to a number of fixed election dates. And in every election that occurred in Canada this year, the incumbent government returned. And so you might be tempted to look at this and say, well, this is a story of a similar story to the other elections, federal and provincial in Canada. What I'd like to suggest to you today is that it is a little bit of a different story, not just because it is historic, but because I think the themes of this election were a bit different. The other elections were very much, there was a lot of discussion about economic uncertainty. And we certainly saw that in this election. Saskatchewan is not divorced from the national and global economic context. But the Saskatchewan election was also, in my mind, about something a little bit different. And I think a very large theme in the election that just concluded yesterday was the issue of identity, Saskatchewan identity. I think the election very much was about pride of place and a renewed or resurgent pride of place. So in that way, the election tapped a lot of emotions that speak to a sort of a form of nationalism almost, although sub-nationalism or provincialism, if you would. And we really saw this in Bradwell's post-election speech. I'm not sure how many of you had a chance to stay up and catch all of it, but it resonated very strongly with these themes. We are not going back. The only place better than Saskatchewan today is Saskatchewan of tomorrow. We are a have province now. We can speak of our province with pride. These were the resonant themes in my mind for this election and for the Saskatchewan Party during this election. And I'll talk a little bit about the campaign and public opinion in a minute, but I'd like to first say that I think the Saskatchewan Party and Bradwell in particular took great care to build this particular linkage between pride of place and the Saskatchewan Party over the 4-year period. We saw this on a number of issues, most notably the standing up for Saskatchewan with respect to potash, Whether or not you think that was actually standing up for Saskatchewan, we can debate, but it was certainly presented and framed in that type of context. And so really, when we talk about the extraordinary leadership popularity numbers of Brad Wall, I think a lot of it taps into the emotion of that type of pride of place and that type of populism. Now, one thing that often is asked with any election, any campaign is, well, were the polls accurate? And there's always a big discussion about the role of opinion polling during elections and how did they do, and that's always an interesting thing to track. And one thing that was quite interesting about the polls that we saw in the Saskatchewan election was actually when you look at their projection of decided voters, especially with the Saskatchewan Party, they actually did pretty good. Post Media in September had the Saskatchewan Party at 63%, Insight in October at 60, a bit low, Forum Research 66, Post Media in early November, close to 67, and 308.com, the website that compiles different election polls and tries to come up with an estimate, had a projected result for Saskatchewan Party of 65%. Of course, the actual result in terms of the popular vote was 64%. So the polls actually did a fairly good job in predicting the Saskatchewan Party vote. Not too bad on the NDP vote as well. 308.com that coalesced all these together projected the NDP at 30%, and the NDP was actually at 32%. So the polls told us where the voters were. They also told us that the Saskatchewan Party support held fairly constant over the course of the campaign. The NDP support actually went up a bit over the campaign, but obviously not enough to really help them. The polls also told us some things about where the public were in terms of policy issues, and it gives us some idea about some of the challenges that the NDP had during the campaign. What's seen was a lot of NDP voters and Saskatchewan Party voters liked the Saskatchewan Party platform, but only NDP voters liked the NDP Party platform. A lot of issues that people were asked, which party do you think would do better on this issue, that issue? The Saskatchewan Party came out ahead. This was true on pretty much every issue except for environment and housing. So the Saskatchewan Party was seen by most voters as being the best protector on a lot of policy issues, which then I think made it challenging for the NDP to really make any headway. The Saskatchewan Party as well, leadership, we're going to be talking about this election for a long time in terms of, those of us who talk about elections for a long time will be talking about it. You all go back to other things. But those of us who like to sort of sort out the tea leaves will be looking and asking the question, how much does leadership matter, and questions like that. And I think we're going to see, first of all, that leadership mattered a great deal. But I think that we also need to look at some campaign issues that worked out very well in the Saskatchewan Party's favor. They were very adept leading up to the election and into the election of undermining or constraining the leadership ratings of Dwayne Lingenfelter. They were very effective at sort of boxing Lingenfelter in on a number of policy issues, and they made it really challenging for the NDP in the election. So overall, I think this has been a historic election for a number of reasons. One, because of the results. Two, because of, I think, the way it captured a sense in the province that is a bit more than just don't change horses midstream or those sorts of cliches that we see in an economically challenging time. The third point I'd like to mention, because I realize my 8 minutes are rapidly expiring, is this is a historic election, or a notable election at least, because we've seen a dramatic turnout decline. I had trouble as an Election Saskatchewan's website this morning, couldn't find official numbers in terms of voter turnout, but we're down roughly 10 percentage points. Saskatchewan has always been a sort of a strong voter turnout province, but in this election we saw this rather significant decline, a 10 percentage point decline is very notable. Now we're at roughly 66%. Albertans would be marveled at such a high turnout rate, but it will also, for those of us that like looking through the tea leaves, leave a big question as to why turnout was so low. Obviously, less competitive elections tend to get lower turnout, but that may not be the entire answer to that question. So I will leave it at that and turn things over to my esteemed colleagues. But again, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions later.
David, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks very much. So, I mean, first of all, I just want to put this election into a bit of historical perspective. The final score, 49-9, in terms of Saskatchewan history, that's actually not unprecedented. In fact, if you define a landslide as having over 80% of the seats, actually that's happened 7 times in Saskatchewan history that one party's had over 80% of the seats, and the Saskatchewan party now is 84% of the seats. So that's actually not that interesting or not that different, right? Now, what is different, though, is the popular vote. That's the real story. The popular vote at 64%. I have to admit, I thought the polls were a bit high on this, but 64%. The highest it's ever been in Saskatchewan history is 57%. So a 64% popular vote is what interests me the most as opposed to the number of seats. And I guess my big question is, and one of the questions I want to ask today, is what does a 64% popular vote for one party mean to Saskatchewan politics? Particularly, is this sort of a Albertization, that's not even a word, it's invented this morning, I guess, an Albertization of Saskatchewan politics, a sort of consensual politics that you see in Alberta, maybe a byproduct of resource wealth, I'm not sure, but are we moving to some sort of consensual politics, some sort of Albertization of Saskatchewan politics? I think that's the question I wanted to try to pose this morning, or this afternoon, I guess. It's been a long night, it was a long night to say. But to answer that question, I wanted to kind of take a quick look at some of the foundations of the Saskatchewan Party's success, and also some of the foundations, if you can call it that, of the NDP's failure. So I'll go through these rather quickly. Some of them I think we already know. And the one thing I was asked this morning by a radio station, you know, say the one thing that contributed to this Bradwell success, and I couldn't come up with just one thing. I'm not sure there is one thing that contributes to the Saskatchewan Party's success. I think it's probably a variety of factors. And it's not very parsimonious, but that's what I've come up with so far. I think obviously the economic boom, we'll talk about this a bit in the question period, but this is obvious. A lot of literature shows you when there's a party, when there is an economic period of growth, the party that's the incumbent gets rewarded. So the economic boom helps out the Saskatchewan Party, evidently. The collapse of third parties, that is not the NDP or the Sask Party, the complete collapse of those parties, they didn't even get 5%, they got 4%, the other parties running. So what that does is that coalesces the right of NDP vote behind the Saskatchewan Party and really avoids the sort of vote splitting that has been the bane of the existence of right-wing parties within Saskatchewan history all the way from 1944 onwards. To remember Tommy Douglas, he had 3 right-wing parties to his right, and that's one of the reasons why he got 20 years of CCF rule here in the 1940s, 1950s, and early 1960s. And in this sense, I think the Saskatchewan Party has now, it was always, but I think even now more, is a successful coalition of liberals and conservatives. And I think that you can see that in the fact that the vote didn't split. There was no third-party vote. And this leads into sort of obviously the centrist, the very centrism, or Bradwell hugging the center. I think that's part of the Saskatchewan Party success. You didn't talk about abortion, and Bradwell didn't talk about abortion in this campaign. Bradwell didn't talk about privatizing crowns. Bradwell didn't talk about delisting services to Medicare or anything like that. Very much the Wall government has been quite a centrist government. I think right now there's 3 Saskatchewans. There is urban sort of a rural Saskatchewan, a suburban Saskatchewan, and an inner city Saskatchewan. The rural Saskatchewan, that's been in the column of the Sask Party for a while now, and the inner city is been in the column of the NDP. But I think last night you saw, like you saw in 2007, but even an extension of the absolute dominance of the Saskatchewan Party in suburban Saskatchewan. They did okay in suburban Saskatchewan last time around. In this election, they dominated suburban Saskatchewan. They had landslides in suburban Saskatchewan. They even started to encroach a bit on the inner cities of Saskatchewan in places like Saskatoon Fairview, for instance. Who would have thought that Saskatoon Fairview, of all places, would end up going towards the Sask Party? So the dominance of suburban Saskatchewan is definitely a foundation of their success. They ran quite a competent government, quite a scandal-free government. That obviously helped them out. And finally, successful political marketing on their part. They framed their opponents well from the get-go, particularly Leinenfelter, and they really framed their opponent's image. Also, they read the mood of the Saskatchewan public extremely well. Saskatchewan public just wasn't in the mood for big spending promises. And they did their research here, and they knew that exactly. And that's why Brad Wall said the first day of the campaign, it's not going to be a bidding war. And he stuck to that. He was very consistent in his political marketing. And I think they've invested thousands of dollars, maybe even almost up to $1 million in the Wall brand. The Wall brand is not something that just gets created overnight. It's been invested in, right? From the 2007 campaign ad that showed Brad Wall with sort of the kids in Swift Current playing football behind him and going, oh gosh, they say I'm a Stampeders fan, ha ha ha, but really, you don't believe them. I'm really a nice guy. And that ad set the tone for the Wall brand. A brand gets built over repeated viewings, right? And this is exactly what happened with Brad Wall. And we saw the brand was built very early on. The brand was invested in. So to start to wrap up a bit here, if you turn now to the NDP, what are some of the I'll call them the foundations of the NDP's failure last night? And it was a failure, obviously. It wasn't a good turnout for the NDP. They weren't expecting this, or maybe if they were expecting, they weren't saying it. So what's some of the reasons for the NDP's failure? Well, I think for a long time, the NDP has absolutely failed to connect with rural Saskatchewan. The NDP got 60% of rural seats in 1991. And since that time, you've just seen a decline every election in the popular vote and the seats in rural Saskatchewan. The NDP just does not understand rural Saskatchewan, doesn't get rural Saskatchewan, doesn't know what rural Saskatchewan wants. And that gives essentially the Sask Party sort of a 20 to 25 seat head start every election. They don't have to even campaign in these places, right? They can just bring all those resources, pour them into suburban Saskatchewan and inner city Saskatchewan. The other, I think, another foundation of the NDP's failure was to get a bit technical and use some of my work, is to talk about a move from sort of a third-way social democracy for a more moderate social democracy to a more traditional social democracy. That didn't go over well. Leinenfelter said in the paper right the day of the election that this is a platform that Alan Blakeney would be proud of. No disrespect to Alan Blakeney, a great premier of Saskatchewan, but the Saskatchewan people do not want a platform that Alan Blakeney would be proud of. They showed that last night. That those ideas for the Saskatchewan people come from the 1970s, and the Saskatchewan people, I think, want them to stay in the 1970s. So that's a bit harsh, but I think that's true. So some sort of renewal of their ideology, I think, is needed. Also, I think it's an old electoral machine. They're using outdated. They're really using outdated methods. Their membership is getting old. They can't go door to door like they used to in a lot of ways. Poor political marketing. As well here. Saskatchewan Party had good political marketing. The NDP had poor political marketing. They allowed their opponents to find their leader. They were inconsistent in their messaging. First of all, they were rough and tumble, and they were street fighters, and they were going to get on Brad Wall in the house. And all of a sudden, that didn't work. We're positive. We're going to put on a sweater. We're going to say positive change all the time. So they first of all started saying, let's run against the deficit, and Brad Wall is going to create a big deficit. And then all of a sudden they were saying, no, we're going to spend a lot when they were talking about the campaign. So people had no idea what the NDP was really going after. And they talked about natural resources, but natural resources wasn't a top of mind issue. Don't campaign on an issue that's not a top of mind issue. So I guess my question to end off is, if I talk about sort of these foundations of the Saskatchewan Party's success, or the foundations of the failure of the NDP, are these foundations structural? That is, are they going to stay there for a long time, or are they transitory? Are they going to disappear? I don't really have an answer to that question. But if you look at the foundations, can Wall continue on to be centrist? Can he keep his coalition of liberals and conservatives together? All governments make mistakes. All governments have scandals. Is that going to hurt the Wall government in the future? Other things, the NDP could get its act together, have a younger generation of leaders, start to put more pressure on the Wall government. So I think it's too early to say whether we actually have an Albertization of Saskatchewan politics. And it's hard to say whether this is something that's going to be a sort of a one-time or one-off sort of transitory election, or something that is really going to have a critical election that's going to maintain a sort of pattern going in the future. It's too early to see, and I think we'll probably talk about that in the question period. But that would be my thoughts so far on this election. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Answered all the easy questions, left the hard ones for later. No, well done. Thank you. David, Michael.
Well, I think I want you as my campaign manager if I ever run for office. That was a superb assessment of weaknesses and strengths.
I want to ask if any of you remember Kim Campbell's statement back in 1993 when she was leading the Conservative Party against the Liberals, and she said at one juncture during that campaign, "Campaigns aren't the time to talk about public policy," or words to that effect. And the press jumped all over her. And I think she was kind of channeling some of her political science professors when she said that, which was kind of unfortunate for her in some ways. But it does raise the question of, what is the relationship between these elections and the policies that issue later? Or is there a relationship? I mean, among many, I think, deeply cynical people, political platforms are put out there really in order to seduce voters, and then governments do what they want. But a much more satisfying interpretation is that really elections like this provide a mandate for governments to implement what's in the platform. And so that's one of three interpretations of the relationship between elections and public policy that I want to just put out there for you to consider. And this one is, I think, the most satisfying one for people. It's the one that governments normally like to offer. It's forward-looking. And the suggestion is that the election authorizes governments to do certain things. Up until then, they didn't have this authorization. Now they have it. It puts stress on promises, and you heard a lot from the Premier about promise-keeping last night and during the campaign. It's a kind of normatively satisfying interpretation that it implies that the government has a duty, once it's in office, to do what it said it was going to do. And it also helps us solve the problem in our own minds of how we keep people whom we've elected doing what they said they would do and acting in our interests. So it's very democratic kind of interpretation as well. You have the kind of unmediated will of the people translated pretty much directly into policy through the platform. I'll speak for myself here, but I want to discourage too much of an investment in this interpretation. I know that it's a congenial one in many ways, and it's one that perhaps we should kind of endorse for normative purposes. But frankly, in this election and in many elections, it's not really clear at all times what exactly has been promised. Yes, some very specific things, but across wide swaths of public policy, not much in the way of what could be construed, I think, as promises. Could you just take that for me?
Yes.
Oh, I got that. The second reason to be a little bit concerned about it is that the campaign itself selects, and David has suggested how the campaign is organized in a way that addresses what the perceived needs of voters are, but not the wide swath of what the needs of the province are going forward.
Maybe it's Brad Wall you should answer.
There you go. Yeah, let me just fix this for good. Okay. I think that it also suggests to people that the ideas of the opposition party were somehow completely, or the other party, were completely rejected. And I don't think there's any question that the NDP were completely rejected. But it's not altogether clear to me that the entire platform of the NDP, whether it was a Blakeney platform or not, was rejected, or that the interpretation or that the electoral outcome will admit of the interpretation, that nothing that the NDP were offering was not of some attraction to the electorate. I still think that tuition fee freezes have certain resonance right across this province, for example. So let me suggest another way of interpreting the election, one that I think is a bit closer to, and a bit more sensible and a bit more closer to actually what has happened. And that is that's what I would call a kind of referendum interpretation, not a narrow referendum as in the sense of are you in favor of fluoride or not, but a broad interpretation of the previous conduct of the government. So this is not a forward-looking interpretation of the platform, but a backward-looking interpretation. This is really a question of how did things work out with this government? Did what they said they were going to do, is that kind of what they did? Was this a government that we have some kind of faith in, or in some sense is broadly reliable? Because voters don't know the future, but they certainly can assess the past. And that past Brad Wall and the Sask Party reminded us about the way in which the government was conducted over the last 5 years. And this kind of interpretation is also kind of satisfying. It loses the moral duty of politicians piece, but it does give politicians a chance to explain what it is they did and why they did it. And it suggests that, maybe there is room for a bit of a discourse between politicians and the public, and the voting public. So a backward look of this election, in a sense that what you really saw was not so much an endorsement of what the government said it's going to do in this platform, but what the government has done in the past, strikes me as a more persuasive way of interpreting things. A third possibility altogether is what you might call a kind of leadership interpretation of the results. The voters selected somebody and some party that they think will act in their interests, with or without promises, with or without sanctions. So the platform in that interpretation is just a kind of public relations requirement. What really matters is the character of the leader, and the platform really becomes kind of a reflection of that. Predictability matters for voters in this interpretation. You want somebody who is reliable, somebody who is in touch, somebody who is in some broad sense like them. And the leader is presumed to have broadly the same kinds of policy interests as you do. I mean, and that's the kind of message of this interpretation. But it's more important that he, in this case, be principled, honest, and have some basic skills. So in this interpretation of the relationship between the election and public policy, the voters are really selecting on character. And then if there are departures in policy preferences, as there will be over the next 5 years, notwithstanding how this election campaign went, there will be things the government does that were unanticipated and that will look like they are departures from what they said they would do. Then voters will discount this to the extent that, or rationalize this to the extent that this represents a departure from their image of the leader. The danger, of course, in this system, in this kind of interpretation, is that the leader is too autonomous, and so autonomous in some ways that he may get the idea that he can rely on charisma and charm, and that policies and decisions themselves don't really have to be defended or explained as they would be in the kind of referendum model. Now, Mr. Wall last night gave us an indication of the interpretation that he prefers. This is what he was quoted as saying, and I think he did say that, although he had a very long speech. Here's what he says. I think the most important directional counsel, which he's taking from the electorate, that we'll take from the voters is that they want to make sure that we're cautious about the future. The worldwide economy is not now a stable thing. It's not a stable thing right now. We can't be overspending. We've got to make sure that we're fiscally responsible. And I think that's a powerful message from the campaign as well. So what Mr. Wall, in my interpretation, is saying is that we got the message from the electorate that this is how we should behave going forward. But in point of fact, this is the message that Mr. Wall offered the electorate. This is the only message, really, that he offered, the only consistent message that he offered. His victory could be interpreted as an endorsement of that. But it's also, and I think much more likely, that it's interpreted in either one or both of those second two ways that I described. Either the electorate is looking at Mr. Wall and his government and passing judgment on how they behaved over the last 4 years and found them quite satisfactory, and or they are looking at Mr. Wall and the government he leads and making a judgment about his character, the kind of person he is, and the kind of person they want to be associated with going forward. And I think those two kinds of interpretations are prudentially better ones. That is to say, they are ones in which if you adopt those, you are less likely to be drawn into the idea that the government somehow has a license, if you like, to do what it wants on the strength of an enormous victory. And that, I just want to conclude on, is the kind of legacy of this. The government has now got so many seats with such a huge popular vote that, and it can easily use up its very, very short list of election promises in a big hurry. And then what is next? is what is next. Has that been endorsed by the election of 2011? I really doubt it. So I think if I'm to counsel you, as Brad Wall is being counseled by the electorate, it would be to take a look at Mr. Wall in a retrospective way, interpret the election results as a judgment on what he has done, allow that his leadership is clearly an asset, but be careful in watching how much he reads into it, how much he interprets from it. Because the great danger now is that he begins to drift away from you and from the rest of the electorate on the strength of what is really, if not unprecedented, an enormous victory.
Thank you very much, Michael. Daniel.
Thank you very much. It's very hard when you're the last one to speak to not bounce back on what has been said so far, and I will certainly do that later. I'm a relatively newcomer to this province. Actually, the first time I actually witnessed a Saskatchewan provincial election on the ground here. Before that, I was in Alberta, and I didn't find this campaign very exciting, although probably more exciting than the campaigns I've witnessed in Alberta, for obvious reason. You know, this campaign, to bounce back on what Loleen said, because I can't resist, yes, there is pride of place, and actually the campaign, the focus was really on 3 Ps, not public-private partnerships, as policy wonks like to talk about, but about pride, prosperity, and personality, okay? And policy, which is the 4th P, was there, of course. Policy issues were debated, but as Michael said, and Colin Campbell before him, the level of policy debate during a campaign is relatively superficial. We saw that in a number of policy areas. Take the 2 most important spending areas in this province, like in all other provinces, education and healthcare. Education, the biggest issue, it seems, well, there was the discussion about tuition, the biggest issue was about whether the academic year school should start before or after Labor Day. Ooh, big policy issue. No, it's not. It's probably the most superficial policy issue you can imagine. But of course, it captures the imagination of the voter. It's really concrete. It's simple, while most policy issues are extremely complex. And so that's I think, an illustration of the superficial nature of policy debates during campaigns. Regarding healthcare, there were, of course, issues put forward by both parties. What's interesting, and there are some interesting ideas, I think, in both platforms, but as Dave McGrane said, in terms of healthcare, the Sask party was very cautious. But what's interesting is, to me, about this election is what we saw in this most recent poll before the election, that people support the Sask party regarding healthcare. They trust the Sask party significantly better than the NDP when dealing with healthcare. Of course, it depends how the question is framed and so forth, but that's not something that you could have imagined 5 years ago. Okay, this is a sea change, a very important change. It took place gradually. But I think it's important. Now, it doesn't mean that Brad Wall has a mandate to do what he wants, or that the Sask party has they have a mandate to do what they want regarding healthcare. It doesn't mean that. It means that so far, the people don't think that they are a threat. They think that they are actually doing with the issue in a pragmatic manner. That's the way I understand it. Or maybe they are not really informed about the issue. That could be another interpretation. But what is sure is that now, when we talk about issue ownership, which is a term used by political scientists, it seems that the NDP no longer owns this issue of healthcare, which is a major, I think, a major change in Saskatchewan politics and in policy debates as well. If we move on and talk about an issue where the NDP adds some traction, is housing. We saw that in the poll that was referred to earlier this afternoon. I would not say that there is strong support for a specific issue like rent control, but certainly this is a very central issue, and a lot has to be done about housing, and probably much more than what is stated in the Sask party platform regarding housing. Why is that? The Premier yesterday said again, we want to have 1.1 million people in this province by 2015. Where will these people stay? Especially newcomers, people from other provinces, people, immigrants, students, all these people who want to move here, we want to attract here if there is not a sufficient rental market. These people won't all come here and buy a home. If you're a new immigrant, unless you're investor, you have a lot of money. Most immigrants don't have that much money. People who come from other provinces, they look for a job. They don't have cash to put on your new home and so forth. And home prices have, of course, increased dramatically here over the last 10 years. I mean, increased in a rather rapid way. So something must be done about the housing market, especially about rentals in this province. And I think that this is about the future of the province. If you have an objective of increasing the population in such a rapid way, you have to deal with it. And it's not just about, of course, issues of homelessness or taking care of the poor, although this is still a major issue when we deal with housing. This is also about the economy, about labor cost. Because, of course, if housing costs increase dramatically, people won't employers will have to increase salaries so that people can actually find a way to stay, move here. And also, it's the availability. Regina has now the lowest vacancy rate in Canada. The lowest in Canada. It's what, 1%, even below 1%. It's very, very low. And so it's not just about prices, although it's a very important issue, affordability, but also about availability. So we need to build rental units at a much rapid pace, but it's a very problematic issue in this province because of shortage of even construction workers and so it's a very hard issue to tackle with. But I think the NDP should, not the NDP, well, the NDP as an opposition party should certainly focus on this issue, but that the SAS party should take that seriously, although it's maybe not their core voters, or they think they're not their core voters who inhabit rental units. If you want to increase the population of the province, it's not just by building new homes. You have to build rental units, and that's very important issue. That was not sufficiently debated during the campaign, in my opinion. Regarding Aboriginal issues and revenue sharing, the SAS party rejected revenue sharing, at least the way the NDP talked about that. But if they reject revenue sharing, they will have to come up with something else, something systematic and bold to deal with Aboriginal issues. When you live in a province where 25% of people 15 and younger are Aboriginal, the future of Aboriginal people is not just about them, although it's very important, it's also about the future of this province, the long-term future of this province. So, of course, education is important, but also fiscal and political issues are important and have to be dealt with in a systematic way. Of course, it's very difficult to deal with these issues. It's a very contentious issue, but the Wall government has to take it really seriously and not try to, just move that off the side or just try to. It's an issue that should be tackled in a systematic way, and it's not because you say no to revenue sharing that you have to just adopt some very incremental or really modest policies. You have to be bold, or at least say that you want to work with First Nations and do something big and not just go back to the old policies of the past, which is often not doing that much. At least or saying the federal government is really in charge and so forth, which is very problematic. Regarding the fiscal situation of the province, there was some discussion about royalties. I think that was an attempt by the NDP to really use it as a wedge issue. I'm not the only one who said that, as you know. But this didn't really work, and I don't think that this. I don't think that the time is actually right to revisit the royalty issue right now, because we don't know what will happen with potash prices in a few months from now. This is so unstable. But certainly we should think about the long-term future of the economy of this province and how to use resource revenues to diversify the economy. We cannot depend on resources as much as we do now forever. This is not sustainable because our resources, the most resources we have, are not sustainable. They are non-renewable resources. And so this is a major issue. And coming from Alberta, this is an issue that is very easy to push aside and say, oh, we are proud and things are so great and tomorrow will be so great. Well, I'm not just thinking about tomorrow. What about in 10, 15, 20 years from now? Not just mentioning generations of the future. Now, of course, the Wall government, the attitude is, okay, we have to pay down the debt first. But what's next? We have to start to think about that right now, to have a long-term plan. and about how to diversify the economy and look at foreign models and what is done in Alaska, in Alberta, in Norway, all around the world, and really maybe put together a body or a commission or really to think about that and have a debate among us to deal with this long-term fiscal future of the province and how we could diversify our economy. Of course, education is a major aspect of that. And we are lucky in Saskatchewan that actually our economy is relatively diverse. It says that we depend on a number of natural resources, more diverse portfolio than Alberta has. We have also a very dynamic, a very large agricultural sector, and some innovations are taking place there. And we are doing more in terms of education than in the past. So I think that there is opportunities here, but we have to move forward and not just thinking that, we will rely on commodities forever. It won't last forever. And we need to tell that to people, to be realistic about this. And you cannot cut taxes forever, okay? At some point it has to stop and you have to invest in the future. Finally, about the environment. That was an issue that was really not on the agenda. But there are clear challenges ahead. One of them concerns an issue that's not just about being green, but about our economy, energy production, especially electricity. We have challenges, we have growing needs. What will we do? Of course, there are a lot of ideas on the table. There are some, of course, the SAS party has focused on carbon capture and clean coal and so forth. And the NDP has talked about renewables, renewable energy. But I think a major issue that politicians may not like to talk about, because maybe it's not about pride of place, is to buy more electricity from Manitoba, which is just next door, has a huge surplus of hydropower, which is renewable, which is relatively affordable. The issue, of course, is how to bring this power further into Saskatchewan. It doesn't look like that great in terms of pride. Oh, we borrow we buy electricity from our neighbors. But I think we should develop a stronger partnership with Manitoba. We talk about the West and how the Western provinces work together. Well, they have a lot of hydropower. They sell it to U.S. states. We can buy more and probably get a good deal, maybe invest even in hydro projects in Manitoba with the province, or do something for the future. And I think that, to me, it's so obvious, but then politicians during a campaign don't want to talk about that because it's not, it's not sexy enough. Maybe it's not about, but it's so obvious, and it's certainly less controversial. Will be much less controversial than, say, reviving the issue of building a nuclear power plant, for example. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the panel members for very thoughtful and thought-provoking presentations. David, my apologies to you. What I meant was that not only did you answer all the hard questions, but you left the hardest one of all on the table for us, and that is, is this a structural or a transitional phenomenon that we're witnessing? That is a really important and fundamental question, which I'll be interested to hear things on. Now, the panelists provided us with multi-foci and multi-factor analysis. Wonderful job, and now it's your turn. Please remember what I said before. Speak loudly, speak clearly, and I wonder if we have someone here who'd like to ask the first question, or in Regina. Yes.
On Saturday, in his North Carolina letter to the editor, he summarized that the voters had forgotten that the NDP had cleaned up the corruption of the Devine government, and he curbed the excess of spending in healthcare. But the Wall government did not reopen the 52 hospitals that the NDP had closed. But the Bradwell government had actually been skating on the hard work that previous NDP government had done. So the Bradwell government had never actually been challenged in their 4 years of their reign. So do you think
They have actually what?
Challenged.
Been challenged.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So the question, ladies and gentlemen, is that to some extent, this government ran and won the past couple of elections on problems that had been created by the previous governments. And the question is, did they do enough, did they do anything to try and fix some of those problems that they criticized the previous government of having created?
Well, one thing I could say first is reverse the question and say that the SAS party has benefited directly from the things that were done under Romano, for example, in terms of balancing the budget, doing very tough choices were made during the 1990s in the aftermath of the two divine governments, which left the province with an unsustainable fiscal situation. And even on potash royalties, Bradwell cited Calvert. Premier Calvert and what he done regarding royalties. So I think that there is actually quite a bit of continuity, and that the NDP, to a certain extent, ironically, paved the way, helped pave the way to Wall's success. But of course, things would have been very different if the economy and commodity prices had been different. So of course, and Wall has done, they done a good job in terms of putting forward a discourse that's moderate and an approach that, again, there is much more continuity than people would have probably imagined in 2007 after the Wall government was elected and came to power. And so I think that's an issue here. So I reversed your question in a way, but I think that's certainly a point.
Could I just, if you take the election as a referendum on the quality of governance we've had over the last 4 years, I think that's a perfectly legitimate question to ask. How challenged has this government been? I mean, it's been a very fortuitous time. Mr. Wall himself talks about that, and to his credit, acknowledges not just the work that the NDP had done, but the fact that international markets have smiled on the province of Saskatchewan in more ways than one. The one exception, I think, to that, and the one place in which he really was challenged, was on the potash takeover. And there, I think people took a lesson away from that about this person, and which I think feeds into that third interpretation of this election, as I indicated before. And that is this somebody to whom we can positively relate? Is this somebody who kind of is one of us? Did he behave the way I would have behaved if I'd known all the facts and I was the premier? Not that people actually ask that question in any explicit way, but I think it's a good question you're asking, and I would say that in general, a fairly easy ride with that one big exception.
Thank you very much.
You want to do what?
In here in Regina?
Yes, please.
Okay. I have a question for everybody on the panel, and it's regarding part of the conversation we've been having on commodity prices. We all know that commodity prices are cyclical, and we can run into some serious fiscal issues if there's a downturn in commodity prices. And something that didn't really enter into the election, actually didn't enter at all, are the entitlements to the agriculture sector. There are hundreds of millions of dollars each year spent on various forms of income support. Okay, now, the New Democrats did, I think, the strangest thing I've ever seen. They completely chickened out, and they ran away from the reputation of the Romano government on being fiscally responsible. And they've placed themselves in a position of being urban socialists, which no one in the rural areas will vote for them. So do you think that the Wall government have the political capital to actually challenge some of these issues for the fiscal sustainability of the province? And if so, how will they move forward with it?
Thank you very much. We heard that very clearly, but I still have to repeat it. In essence, the question is, given the large mandate that the Saskatchewan Party has, will they be able to tackle some of the structural issues in the commodity sector, in the agriculture sector, that perhaps need to be fixed? Do they now have enough political capital to be able to do some of the major changes that may be required in certain parts of the economy, and particularly agriculture. Yes.
I can make just a couple quick comments on that. I mean, number one, in terms of the agricultural subsidies, I don't see Bradwell spending political capital on that. He has a rural base, and he wants to maintain that rural base, so no reason to rock the boat there. And if indeed, commodity prices do go down, and he does start to run a deficit, I mean, I think he'll probably cut spending elsewhere. I don't know. He'll slow down the amount of childcare spaces being created. He'll not invest as much in social assistance. I think he'll do other things that won't hurt his rural base. I think that's just too sacrosanct. And the second comment, just on a bit, you talked a bit about rural areas in the NDP, and I'm not so sure. The NDP had a lot, and this relates to the last question. The NDP has, I'm not exactly sure how to word this, had a lot of brand equity built up. Right? The NDP brand was good. It was fiscally responsible. It brought the province through hard times. It had a series of excellent leaders from Douglas to Blakeney to Romano. And I'm just wondering how much damage that this campaign has done to the NDP brand and the equity in the NDP brand. I'm not sure we know that for sure. But the NDP brand, is simply not what it used to be. And we'll only know in the future whether the damage has been long-term in terms of what's happened to the NDP brand in this province.
Daniel.
I totally agree with Dave that I don't think that Bradwell will attack farmers' entitlements at this point. I think it's the term entitlement is used often in reference to the welfare state, but there is a farming welfare state which is enormous, and we don't talk about it in these terms. And this is about big government too, and they have the same issue in the U.S., but they don't, of course, people on the right, they don't use this language when talking about farmers. I don't think he would do anything, but the main issue is the fiscal situation, and right now it's relatively good. The thing with Bradwell, it's true that he was, to go back to the previous question, he was not really tested except on the issue of potash, because the fiscal situation of the province is quite favorable, at least compared to what's going on all around us. And so he's used to be more of a Santa Claus. You give away, tax cuts here and there, and you spend more on highways and so forth. It's something very different than, for example, what Roy Romano had to do in the early 1990s and come and be mean because he had to, or that's the way the old situation was framed. If there would be a reversal in our fiscal situation due to falling commodity prices, a global economic crash, or at least another great recession, if this one is actually over, things could change, and he may have to change. But it's hard for a politician when you arrive in power and you can play Santa Claus because things are going well to then turn things around. George Bush, for example, in the U.S. was never able to tackle the deficit, in part because when he came to power, he was actually doing very well. There were surpluses, and then all the money was spent away, but could not even become that, even be like Ronald Reagan. So I think that if commodity prices fall dramatically, and this could happen, don't forget that it could happen at any time. It's not just cyclical. Right now, cycles are all upside down. We don't know what will happen in 2 weeks from now. I'm a bit dramatic here, but I hope it works. You're scared. So if things change, you never know what could happen, but it will have. We have to think here about a dramatic situation. Who knows?
Thank you very much.
Don't you think there is also a second chance? And I think the finance minister, Jennifer, I think when there was that little blip in the budget, so they have been challenged by commodity prices, and arguably the question is, did they learn something from that?
So the question is that not that they didn't face any challenges, there were some challenges with the previous government, and have they learned something from how to deal with those challenges?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That was a challenge, not one that the premier or the party wanted to highlight, because the challenge itself was a product of their own miscalculation. And so if that issue could be managed and was managed in the context of multiple budgets, then that's to the good. But it's pretty hard to create much political capital by solving a problem that you created yourself. But it doesn't diminish the problem, Greg. You're absolutely right. And I think the rhetoric of the premier around care, be careful going forward, be conservative, probably is in some way a product of that experience. And my guess is he would never want to repeat that, and he's probably told his cabinet that's not going to happen again. Now, having said that, governments elected with a majority of this size will become overconfident, and mistakes about prices and their stability and their levels are sometimes a product of overconfidence. So there's no guarantee that this government over the next 4 years won't repeat that mistake. But having made it once, it seems to me less likely.
I think they won't repeat the mistake regarding potash itself, and maybe another commodity. But just regarding that, I think that this afforded an opportunity to the SAS parties to reduce the number of civil servants. I mean, in the aftermath of that, they launched their plan, and that's consistent with their party identity in a way. To cut in the waste and so forth, what is perceived as waste. But in the long run, that might be costly because you may actually along the road need to hire and train new civil servants. So, but in the short run, it has worked well for them, I think, and would especially work well in relationship to their base.
Thank you. Is there a question in Regina?
Yes, question here.
There were certain aspects of both the NDP and SAS party's campaign that, from my observation, had the sense of maybe being written on the back of a napkin, very quickly thrown out without a lot of background behind them. To what extent do you think that speaks to the difficulty of political parties communicating through the media, or does it indicate a lack of policy rigor within both parties?
Thank you very much. If I heard correctly, you're asking regarding public policy during campaigns being written on the back of envelopes, as opposed to highly researched and well thought out policy papers. I'll turn that question to the panel.
Well, thank you for your question. I think that there were different dynamics. I don't put any of it on the media, but in terms of why we saw the policy platforms come out that we did, I think each party was just trying to attract its share of the electorate and more, and whether or not things cohered into a larger vision, I don't think was necessarily the main focus. The Wall government didn't need to do a lot. The Saskatchewan party didn't need to do a lot. They needed to sort of do enough to seem like they weren't just saying, well, we're going to keep doing the same stuff, but they did a small amount to give them something to talk about that was still not going to cost a fair bit. The NDP often seemed like they were throwing a number out. At certain points, it just seemed like, well, what's the promise today? Oh, here's another one, here's another one. And and of course, the Saskatchewan party was able to jump all over that. So I think the Saskatchewan party had a very conservative platform, small c conservative in terms of fiscally conservative, trying to appeal to voters on a very, I believe Danielle used the word superficial, but very small item basis. And the NDP was in my mind looking for something that would stick. Whether or not someone actually sat down and said, well, how does this all fit together as a coherent whole, I'm not sure.
I think the pressure on the part of the NDP to actually do that was not that great because they were almost certain not to be elected. And so when you have a very good chance to be elected, and the polls were quite clear, in the case of the SAS party, didn't want to take any risk and overpromise. So they just decided to adopt a conservative approach, not just because it's in tune with their identity as a party, but also because they knew that they will have to implement most of these issues, as Michael mentioned earlier. So the risk for the NDP, the risk would have been to get elected and have to fulfill all these promises, but the risk was very low. And it's funny because earlier today, I was watching what's going on in France, and today there was a big debate in the French National Assembly, and they were talking about the 1997 election, and some politician was saying that the Socialist Party in France won on policies designed on the corner of a napkin, and the 35 hours week and so forth. And it was actually, in a way, true that they didn't really expect to win. And then they implemented these policies that were designed at the very last minute, and it didn't work very well for them.
I would say just quickly. I think the policies. It's tough to get really concrete over this, but I'm pretty clear that the policies of the Saskatchewan Party were made through polling and market research and focus groups and stuff like that. So that's very clear. That's how they made their policies. Now, whether that's good or bad is another question, right? It's good because it gets you 64% of the vote, but I mean, how well do these policies work in the complicated world of governance and the next 4 years is another question.
And that gets to the heart of Michael's point, which was this an election about what people preferred rather than what the province needs? Very fundamental point. Yes.
Michael, I really like your cautionary note a little bit about with such a majority, we have to watch Brad Wall now a little bit to see if he moves away from our values. And also the idea of maybe now is a really good time for Brad Wall, Saskatchewan Party, to sit down with experts and people and think about what are the kinds of policies that in 4 years we're going to say, again, his values or the values of our government match that of the people. And I think that's really, really important. Ed Miliband, the leader of the opposition for the Brits, on the weekend wrote in The Guardian that very thing. He talked about the Wall Street protests, but at St. Paul's Cathedral in London, as being really not a division between rich and poor as much as between people's values are here, but the actions of our politicians and he says corporations are just there's not a relationship between them, pulling further and further apart. My question is, what can I do to encourage Brad Wall to seek that kind of wisdom to develop really good policy that makes Saskatchewan's wealth go in a direction that was different than else's?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Let me just repeat the essence of it. The essence of it is an election enough for a government to understand what it wants to and what it should do, or is it now, once you've figured out what the scope of your mandate, now may be a time to take stock, reflect on what you want to do for the next 4 years that will really make a positive difference, and how do you engage people in that process?
I think that this is a very important point because we all agree that the SAS party platform was relatively modest, and for good reason, because they want to make sure that they can implement most of the policies they put forward in their platform. But there is a danger in politics, even when you're very successful, is to run out of gas, that is to run out of ideas. When you have accomplished most of what's in your platform, what do you do next? And it happens regularly to politicians. That's what happened in the UK with Tony Blair in a way. You mentioned Ed Miliband. After a while, the Blair's program was relatively modest in a way, the third way, and a lot of continuity with Thatcherism actually in the economic policy, and also new policies, but that were enacted during his first mandate. And then what's next? What do you do next? Well, the next thing he did is participating in the Iraq War, which was for him the kiss of death politically. But that was something external in a way that he grabbed to redefine himself as someone who was doing something important. And of course, in Saskatchewan, there is no threat that will participate in a war because nothing else, because the program has achieved all its objectives. But I say that launching public consultations, bringing experts in and discussing major issues like mention the relationship with First Nations, economic development, political relations and so forth, very important. Resource revenues, the future of the province, diversifying the economy. These are broad themes, and certainly that a dialogue over these issues, even if they were not that central to the party's platform, or I think could be very beneficial even to the SAS party because they have the upper hand. They are very strong, and the danger when you're very strong is to become arrogant or to be perceived as arrogant, which is not exactly the same thing. And reaching out to people. And launching consultations about real issues in a very systematic way could actually help the party regenerate its own agenda and the government to actually not run out of fuel, that is, run out of policy ideas that can make a difference. So it's actually in their interest to do this, in my opinion, and in the interest of the province too.
So I agree with everything Danielle has said about the danger here and the opportunities that the government has with this. The danger is, of the three interpretations I offered, is the government invests 100% in the first one of those, or divides it up between that one and the leadership one, but really says we can govern the way we want now. On the basis of a very modest platform, we can put these measures in place, and then we can kind of do what it is that we want. We can turn inward and pat one another on the back for what a fantastic campaign we've run, and then govern excessively prudentially, sort of going from issue to issue, which is, if you want to look at it another way, the kind of dark side of what Mr. Wall is touting as a positive thing. You know, we're not going to do too much. We're going to be conservative. We're going to continue to do what we were doing. And that does certainly sound like a recipe for success, certainly politically, whether it's or electorally. Whether it's a recipe for the success and entrenchment of the Sask Party brand long term is another totally different question. So I guess I would just say, you know, encourage Mr. Wall and the Saskatchewan Party to think that what they received was an assessment of the previous 4 years, and not a blank check going forward. And yes, take some pride in the fact that his leadership has emerged as very strong, but I personally think it's still rather fragile. I don't think there's. I think it's going to take another term of the kind of quality of leadership you're talking about that will convince voters that we're in the hands of somebody who not only knows how to manage a campaign, but who knows how to manage the future of the province long term.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Winning that riding, and whether you think her being Aboriginal and female in urban riding is automatically securing her a portfolio of the cabinet.
Thank you very much. So this is a question about a specific outcome in terms of Jennifer Campo in Saskatoon, female Aboriginal, and the question of two things, whether it guarantees her a position in cabinet and whether having such a person in cabinet and government will influence public policy.
I mean, briefly, you know, in terms of that specific riding, I mean, I think the Wall campaign was probably thinking they could almost sweep the table. I mean, with the numbers they were getting, so there's almost no surprises. Maybe with the two northern ridings would have been a slight surprise to them. So in terms of Campo and in cabinet. Probably not, but we'll wait and see. That could be the bold type of move that maybe is needed at this moment, right? And I think the broader question in your question, Miriam, is that what's now the relationship between the Saskatchewan Party and the inner cities of Saskatoon and Regina, and to a lesser extent the inner cities of PA and Moose Jaw. You know, they have some representation from there now, where they never ever, at least since 1982, if you include the Progressive Conservatives as part of the Sask Party or you know, their ancestors, they've never had any input from the inner cities, right? And how they can relate to the inner cities. And if I'm inner city caucus member, I'm in a small minority. Most of the members are suburban or rural. How am I going to relate to that? And what kind of, and you know, and how far can they go in sort of trying to do things that benefit the inner city without endangering their bases in suburbia and in rural Saskatchewan. So the relationship between the Saskatchewan Party and the inner city is going to be absolutely fascinating to watch, to see if they can maintain these gains. And if they can't maintain these gains, and these are the first ones NDP will take back, and then NDP will, you know, the plan would be to eventually move on and take back the rest of them in suburban and maybe some rural areas. But to the extent they can maintain the inner cities, is going to be very interesting how they relate to inner cities. Remember last time, just a bit long answer, but remember last time, first thing that Brad Wall did when he came into power was shut down Station 20 West. Not a good move for the inner cities, right? You know, I'm not anticipating for him to do something like that, but that shows, I think, his lack of understanding of the inner cities. So we're going to see how he relates to these areas that, frankly, generally aren't that friendly to him, but now all of a sudden, surprisingly are.
Thank you very much. Regina. Yes.
Yeah, I wonder if I can turn to some of the comments that Loleen and David made earlier about the nature of the ideological space in Saskatchewan, or the Alberticization of Saskatchewan. You know, that Saskatchewan has had a long history of ideological government, strongly ideological on the left and the right. But the space has changed quite a bit over the years. And increasingly there's less room on both the far right and the far left, if you will. Certainly the idea of social democracy has become an empty vessel. It doesn't mean much anymore. You know, the Occupy movement kind of signifies kind of an end of all of this, that there's really no ideas there, no leadership, no coherence. And so what does the NDP have to do to find a place on the spectrum? Do they just have to demonstrate that they're better managers than the managers of capitalism, if you will, than the Sask Party? Do they have to wait till the Sask Party implodes and just say we're waiting, we're still in the second choice? So given the constrained ideological environment that we're operating in Canada, is there any place for the NDP to go? I mean, you know, they're certainly not going to revive although they tried, obviously policies from the 70s and 80s, renationalizing, and those things are all kind of finished. So where is there to go for the NDP in this new ideological environment?
Thank you, Ken. Just in a nutshell, given that we've had what amounts to ideological compression and a crowding of the center, what will the NDP be able to do in order to find space for itself to articulate its policies and programs and differentiate itself from the Sask Party?
I think that's an excellent question, Ken, and I don't know if it's so much that everything's been crowded to the center. I think the center has expanded considerably. What things that used to define the left and the right, I think a lot of them have disappeared. There was an interesting poll this weekend that came out in Alberta, and a lot of Albertans are becoming increasingly tolerant on moral issues. And when you read the Calgary Herald, and there's a 80-year-old conservative female voter saying, same-sex marriage, it is what it is, that's fine. You know, that suggests that the political center has, that there's been a very large expansion of it. And the extent to which the Wall government, or the Saskatchewan Party, I should say, is able to sort of keep that conservative, liberal base within their big tent party, I think it presents a real challenge for the NDP to try to differentiate itself and to appeal to an electorate that is within this very large middle space in the political spectrum. I think that they need to do some very significant changes in terms of leadership, obviously, in terms of membership and platform, to try to be seen as a young, fresh, new party somehow. Because right now they've got sort of this stale, old party to them that they need to shed, and so they need to do something. Dave referred to political marketing, but they need a new image, and where they're going to find that in terms of ideological space, I think is a bit of a challenge. It'll have to be, in my mind, it'll have to be somewhere within that center where the Saskatchewan Party already is, and differentiate themselves somehow within that space.
Yeah, just really briefly, I think it somewhat depends on, like Loleen said, a bit on Brad Wall, right? If the Sask Party does go to the right, which I don't think they are, but if they do go to the right, that opens up a lot of space to the NDP to take over the center again. But let's say the Sask Party remains as it is, a sort of a liberal conservative coalition, a sort of a big party of the center. I think the NDP has to go and fight Brad Wall on his own ground. Right. I think in this election they tried to sort of they tried to say, hey, Saskatchewan people, come over with us, right? You know, come over back to the 1970s, right? You know, please come on over. We got good ideas. You know, follow us. I don't think that's going to work. I think you need to sort of fight Brad Wall on his own grounds. I think they have to talk about the economy, strategic intervention in the economy. They got to talk about healthcare. They got to talk about education. They got to probably present things that are different to Brad Wall, but fight him on his own ground. I think if they're trying to change people's minds, they're losing. I think that they have to sort of try to differentiate themselves on what Brad Wall is doing, and you know, not to be cynical, but maybe a bit of a Brad Wall light of sorts, right? Maybe that might be a better way to describe it than sort of trying to create this huge, massive wedge and divergence. That might not be the best way to go about it.
Hans.
You talked about 3 Saskatchewans, so I wonder if you could speculate about a 4th, as to say the average in Saskatchewan. To what extent, how do they handle the North? I wasn't following that too closely. That's the first thing. And we talked about Center Cities, but there are more Aboriginals there. And we had recently, as I recall, an Aboriginal leader calling for the creation of an Aboriginal party. Now, whether that's going to happen soon, I don't know, but I think these are some importance of issues that both parties are going to have to look at pretty soon. Not only for political reasons, but for moral reasons. We were thinking about the future 10, 15 years in advance. I would think that this issue is going to be more and more important. And I would think that parties would neglect it at their peril.
Thank you, Hans. I guess people have talked about the Albertization of the party and of the political system. And Hans, you're asking about the Aboriginalization of both the political, the party context, the party environment, but also policies devoting more attention to it in light of the always existing but increasingly important aspect of having to deal with those issues, the Aboriginal issues in today's day and context. So what can we expect in the future in that regard? What is this one of those issues, I think, Hans, you're saying, that the government really has to look at seriously, regardless of what their position may have been on revenue sharing?
I'll answer that briefly because I know we're getting short on time, but I think that absolutely this is something that the government needs to consider. My fellow panelists noted that there's a challenge in terms of it's a rather small platform that the Saskatchewan Party invoked in the election, and beyond that, their message was the future, a great future. Well, I think the fact that they have this small window of promises to fulfill presents a bit of an opportunity for the party, and for the party to move forward as the party of the future. And if they are going to be the party of the future, they have no choice but to look at Saskatchewan's Aboriginal future. They have no choice but to look at Saskatchewan's economic future. There they could probably take some lessons from Alberta. Like Danielle, I was in Alberta during the boom times of the late 90s and early 2000s, and they could learn from Alberta what not to do in terms of squandering opportunity on very volatile natural resources. But there's a lot of things that they could do to look towards Saskatchewan's future. And if they framed it in that way, I think a lot of issues that might not seem like Saskatchewan Party issues actually could be very successfully articulated and promoted by the Saskatchewan Party. So the question is, will the Wall government see that opportunity for themselves to create this sort of great legacy for the future of the province, or will they get into housekeeping politics and just respond to issues? And that's, I think, sort of both the opportunity for the party and the risk. It depends on which tack they take.
And I just want to bounce back on this word legacy. It's something that's very important, and Bradwell is very popular. But the question is to know, you want, as most politicians, they want to be remembered as people who have made a difference. Now, Potash Corp was an issue, but it's saying no. Well, what do you do in a positive way to change things for the future? Something bold, and certainly there's not enough in the platform probably to do that. And just saying we maintain prosperity and so forth, or we cut taxes, again, it's a cutting taxes, negative agenda. So I think there are a lot of big issues out there that are waiting to be tackled. And there is an opportunity here. I absolutely agree with you, Loleen, on that. And I hope people are listening to what we are saying.
Regina. Is there a question from Regina?
Last hand.
I don't think so. No.
I have a question here.
Okay, thank you.
I'm wondering, it's Li Hui Zhang from Regina. Hi, I'm wondering if we remove the incumbent effect, and if we also remove the strategic behavior by the two parties, if we focus only on the policy issues, which parties' policies are more consistent with Saskatchewan's long-term benefits? Making lots of assumptions.
It's almost 2:30.
Michael. Danielle?
So
well, we've already heard. Sorry, John.
Yes,
Did everybody hear the question?
Yeah, I heard it.
Okay. I mean, we've already heard that that the Sask Party has garnered the faith of the electorate in these polls around certain of these big areas. Anyway, but if you're asking which of their policies is which platform is right for the future, I guess the easiest way to answer that is, well, the electorate in a way had a choice about the array of policies that David identified, and I don't think it's a case of, again, endorsing what Brad Wall put on offer as much as endorsing him, and endorsing the idea that what is coming down the pipe, they would prefer to have the Sask Party deal with. And so, as we've all said now, and it's a bit of we're kind of repeating ourselves, but there's a great trap here for the Sask Party to sit back, implement what they've said they will do, call it keeping their promises, and basically allow themselves to be hit by events, because it's just a matter of time before something hits them sideways. Alternatively, they can begin to address some of the big questions that Danielle and David and Loleen have talked about that need to be addressed and that haven't been addressed, and I'm not criticizing, because the electoral campaigns aren't the time to return to Mrs. Campbell. I mean, elections aren't the time to address these big issues when you are busy doing the strategic things that you're talking about, Li Wei. And I don't think we should criticize politicians and political parties for being strategic. But once elected, now they have to let that go and become a government. And that's what we haven't seen so far. I mean, all we have to go on is the last 4 years. And if we're satisfied with that, as we evidently are, that shouldn't be the end of it. The next thing is, okay, the next 4 years. Take your electoral platform, which has been endorsed in some broad sense, and tell us what you're going to do with this mandate. If the government doesn't do that, either in the throne speech or the budget or the opportunities that are coming up, then I think we have a right to be disappointed, notwithstanding the overall overwhelming majority they've received. And so it's very much now in the government's hands. It's a great victory, and I'm sure they're very happy about it, but it's a great challenge too.
I said really brief, because I feel I've been kind of harsh on the NDP this panel here. So just really briefly, to talk about the NDP platform, I think the problem with the NDP platform wasn't that there was ideas from the 70s. I mean, 1 or 2 ideas from the 70s is okay, but I think there was 20 ideas from the 70s, right? So in some ways, I think that, you know, if the Bradwell government doesn't want to do something a bit visionary, they could maybe even take an idea or two out of the NDP platform. That would be something that'd be pretty large and significant, and would show Bradwell as a statesman, maybe something that does benefit the inner city or something like that, right? So that'd be something that Bradwell could definitely do. And Bradwell, I don't know if he could do it now, but Bradwell said tomorrow, hey, I think we should start negotiations for revenue sharing with First Nations people. That'd be amazing. I think that'd be maybe I don't know if they're well received or not. Or I'm gonna make climate change. I'm gonna be the climate change premier or something like that, right? You know, so he might have a chance here to do something a bit bold with such a large majority. Whether he's going to do it or not remains to be seen. But it could be an interesting political strategy.
Well, oh my, we're getting close to the end, and maybe I will take one more question because you had your hand up earlier, and that'll have to be the last one. Thank you.
All right, I just want to talk about youth and complacency. You talked about with voting. We did have strong numbers when it came to the advanced polls, but then there was a slight decline when it came to the polls itself. I don't know if that's due to complacency from necessarily the people or not the candidates themselves not really going out of their way. For example, with the Sask Party in Saskatoon Eastview, a long-term stronghold of Judy Juners, and she lost to Corey Tucker, who is a new, relative young guy who's going to be having a family, starting a family. Is part of this new brand that Brad Wall is bringing, with moving Saskatchewan forward. Is there complacency that we're seeing, not necessarily from the voters, but from, say, incumbents? Is that really due to how or why the NDP lost, not just in the riding in Eastview, but even in Saskatoon-Meewasin with Frank Quinnell losing to Roger Parent? And he had a strong turnout in not 2003, but, or pardon me, 2003, but not in 2007? Is that due to, like, you know what, we're the natural governing party, I think we could take this for ourselves?
Okay, thank you. So what accounts for the implosion by the NDP? Complacency or dissatisfaction by the electorate?
That's a good question. First of all, in terms of, you mentioned the turnout in advance polls. Turnout in advance polls is usually a very poor predictor of turnout on election day. So we always hear these stories, oh, high advance poll turnout, oh, declining turnout, and it's always a surprise every time. Next time, let's anticipate that. But you mentioned a number of things, and just quickly, I think with respect to Saskatoon-Meewasin, and actually I'm going to keep referring to all the things Dave said, but with respect to Saskatoon-Meewasin, I think the lack of Liberal vote splitting in that particular constituency probably played a role. With the local campaigns, getting your voters out matters, and if Dave is correct that the NDP machine is perhaps not as invigorated as it has been in the past, then that local turnout in some of these urban sort of inner city ridings is probably a role to play. And then in the broader sense, not in terms of NDP turnout, but in broader turnout, in some ways I just wonder if the broader trend of lower turnout has sort of caught up to Saskatchewan. We see this not only across Canada, we see this in Western democracies, and it's just, there seems to be a lower public interest in voting, and whether or not one thinks that is a problem is something that can be debated, but it just seems to be where we are heading generationally over time.
And this will all change if David McGrane runs for office.
Suddenly,
everything would change.
All right, I think we've seen the first nomination for a new leader.
Exactly.
Which party, I guess, is the question.
Don't start any rumors, huh?
I want to thank the panel for excellent presentation, and you, the audience, both here in Saskatoon and in Regina, for excellent questions, which made for a wonderful event. And won't you please join me in thanking the panel and thanking you as well.
Thanks, Regina.
Thanks. You're going to start some rumors there, Danielle.
Huh?
You're going to start some rumors.
It's interesting, I was a SAS party. I think it went well. We had some questions to be bringing all the fresh faces as they came up.
Exciting times.
Yeah, it was. Interesting stuff here too. I mean, simulcasting the whole thing. Yeah. It's good. We'll see you soon.
Thank you very much. I hope you behave properly.
Really? You guys were awesome.
Come on, buddy. How you doing? You recovered?
I told him that there were a few things that needed to change.
I haven't had a chance to read it. He just emailed it to me this week.
Oh, okay. He said he had a vote right after this.
Yeah, we're going to meet.
Okay.
I didn't know we were meeting for
Oh.
When do you need a grade for?
No, that's not it. That's not the issue. I maybe I foolishly said that I saw some problems. Not major ones, but some of the things weren't really to expect. So I didn't want to talk with him about it. That's why I asked.
Okay, yeah, no, I haven't read it. Quite honestly, it'll be a little while. Like we've got, when I say we, he's got his thesis proposal pretty much mapped out. And
all right, no, there are a few things in the focus that are paper, which of course is supposed to reflect what he's going to do in the proposal subsequently. It may just be awkward wording, but a couple of variables in there that he wants to look at in terms of pressure analysis. I'm not quite sure what he's doing.
okay. Would you mind letting me know what they are. I never, this is my first graduate student to supervise, so I don't, perhaps I'm missing some things.
No.
So,
It may just be a wording. Well, if you have 5 minutes after you get back, we can briefly talk about it.
Sure.